Welcome, everyone, to the On Poly podcast. I'm Steve Paikin.
And I'm John Michael McGrath.
Today on the pod, more appalling allegations that a drunk driver has killed 3 children. Is it time for more provincial action?
Still on the roads, should municipalities be allowed to put up cameras wherever they want to catch speeders? The Premier doesn't love the idea.
My pal John Michael wants to talk about, what else? A new planning bill. I guess we'll indulge him.
And your column, my column, focuses on how Mark Carney may have just lobbed a hand grenade into Ontario politics.
And this week marked the 60th anniversary of the creation of the colleges system in Ontario. It's one of our truly great success stories, but it's also a system which is facing some unprecedented challenges these days.
It's Friday, May 23rd, 2025, so let's get to it.
JMM, my little sugar fix this week.
Hello,
which
sir.
I forgot to do last week. That was terrible.
Well, it was budget, so we were busy.
It was the budget day, and Jessica Smith-Cross was sitting there,
Yes.
and I guess I was just so focused on the numbers, I forgot to do the sugar thing off the top, and it kind of discombobulated me.
Do you want to do it twice to catch up?
Let's do that. We can't let our average fall here. Does the shirt today reflect your mood, or what's the story here?
Well, I know you're going through a bit of a difficult time, and I thought I would join you and all of Leafs Nation in mourning for, what are we, at the 58th consecutive year?
Yeah, I'm afraid so. So for those listening on podcast, he's wearing all black today.
I'm entirely in black.
Yeah.
I did not watch the game, but
surprise.
I got an early sense early in the evening that things were not going well, and I thought of you, I want to say.
Well, thank you, I think. Anyway, yeah, that was a very sad Sunday night, but... you know, God bless him. Sadly, it is just like the Leafs to go into Florida, win Game 6 in thrilling, exciting fashion, come home for Game 7, and sadly, I guess the tank was empty or something. I don't know, but there we go. I am wearing today Mr. Bill Davis,
yes,
Ontario's 18th Premier, but that's not why. And to find out why I'm wearing Bill Davis, you'll have to wait a little longer. It has to do with the column I wrote this week.
I've already got the Bill Davis reference in early in the episode.
So now we got to find a way to get Hamilton in, and we're all constitutionally set here. Couple of, there will be some moments, I think I just had one. There will be some moments during the course of this podcast where I may wince. And the reason is I got off the ice about an hour ago after playing hockey. There's about a minute left in the game. There's a puck loose at our blue line, and I am reaching for the puck to push it out of our zone to protect our lead. And the guy from the other team who's coming towards the puck is thinking, I'm not going for the puck. I'm going to go kill him. The him being me. Chris, I know it was a clean hit. I'm not concerned about that. But Chris is 6 feet tall, 245 pounds, and 25 years younger than me. So I think you can imagine when the collision took place, who got the worst of that.
Yes. The laws of physics are pretty
I'm afraid they're immutable. Yes,
Yes.
they are. Now, shall we do a couple of shout-outs here before we begin? This is last week. I'm in this building, 2180 Yonge Street. There's a guy walking onto the elevator making a delivery as I'm about to walk off the elevator. And he sees me, and he stops the door from closing because he wants to tell me how much he loves the podcast. Stephen Murray, thanks a lot. That was a very happy encounter at the elevator. So that's one. Number 2, Victoria Day weekend. I'm in Montreal, going for a family event in Montreal. Coming back, Union Station, returning. Some 20-year-old, can I call him a kid? He's a 20-year-old kid. Cameron Duncan, University of Guelph student. He stops me to say that he and his grandfather, David Donaldson, are regular listeners of the On Poly podcast. So thank you, Grandpa Donaldson, and thank you, Cameron. Glad to have you aboard. And Cameron, it was lovely to meet you at Union Station.
I actually have a shout out. I was at the legislature last week for a function. This was a send-off function for this year's cohort of the Ontario Legislative Intern Program.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about them before on the podcast. Really neat program. It will not surprise you that we had some fans in that crowd. One of them, a young man named Winston, told me that the podcast was actually how he got his job. He currently works at the legislature for an MPP. He was watching YouTube one day, and the algorithm served up our podcast, and he was like, well, what's this all about? And it started his interest in provincial politics.
Awesome. That's great.
Very, very nice to hear. Thank you so much to Winston for listening. To Winston's employer, all of his strengths are his own, and all of his defects are Steve's fault.
Yes, okay, I'll sign on to that. One more housekeeping item before we go here, and a reminder that we've got a live program coming up this week. This week? Next week. Next week. It's Friday. Next week. It's at the Isabel Bader Theatre on the campus of Victoria University at the University of Toronto. It is Wednesday, May 28th, 6:15 p.m. We're going to put a link on the screen right now to a website where you can find more information, and we will put a link in the show notes as well. Tickets are free. You can't beat the price. Tickets are free. It's a TVO today, and it's a podcast special. We're doing a 2-in-1, so come see JMM and me in person.
Yes, absolutely. We will be recording a regular episode with an extended segment for audience members to ask us questions. So think of it as a live mailbag, and we hope to see all of you there.
Excellent. And with that, off to issue 1. It has been almost 5 decades since Toronto Police developed a program called RIDE, Reduce Impaired Driving Everywhere. Then, in the 1980s, MAD came on the scene, Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And yet, this scourge continues to haunt us. Now, while he is considered innocent until proven guilty, a 19-year-old is in prison tonight facing 12 charges, including 3 counts of impaired driving causing death related to a crash that took the lives of 3 children. JMM, details please.
Yeah, just a really horrifying story. The family was out celebrating the Victoria Day long weekend in Milton. They were heading home early in the morning and stopped at a red light when a Dodge Caravan coming off of the highway crashed into them. The mother of the 3 children and her boyfriend survived. One sibling also survived. Cannot even imagine what the family is going through right now, I think in part because, I don't know, as a parent, I mean, one of the memories I genuinely love is like getting home late after a night with family and having my kid asleep in the back car, right? That's such a nice, peaceful thought for me, and to see something like this turned into a horror story is really difficult.
I wish we could report that this was the one and only time this has ever happened, but of course that is not the case. Many of us will well remember a few years ago a man named Marco Muzzo from a wealthy York Region family getting full early parole after killing 3 of Jennifer Neville Lake's kids and their grandfather back in 2015, so it's 10 years ago already that happened. Again, drunk driving involved. Muzzo was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He served less than half of that. The parole board said he was not a threat to reoffend, and so there we go.
Yeah, and so some of this is a federal matter, right? The case of the parole, that is a matter of federal legislation, but there are provincial offenses because when cars use the highways, they're using provincial highways, and that's provincial jurisdiction. The Ford government has actually brought forward some stronger penalties, particularly for impaired drivers. Anyone convicted of a drunk driving event which causes a death can receive a lifetime suspension of their driver's license. That is a penalty that has been on the book for some time. In some cases, the government is reforming the law to allow that to be used more frequently than it has been. Courts have been reluctant to impose that penalty because for many people, losing your driver's license is also functionally losing your livelihood. When we're talking about people who have already lost their lives, I think the courts might balance that a bit differently. People convicted of impaired driving can also be required to install functionally a breathalyzer in their car so that they have to prove their sobriety before the car will even start. And impaired drivers can have their licenses suspended for first and second time alcohol and drug-related offenses. Now, obviously, the catch is that all of these measures only work after somebody has been caught at least once in one of these cases.
To that end, let me just say one more thing, which is that this is a crime that seems to be prevalently among younger men.
Yes.
And we have younger men watching this program and listening to this podcast. So maybe I would just say to them, it's enough already. It has never been easier not to drive drunk. We have decent public transit in big cities in this province. You've got friends who can drive you home. You can call a taxi. There is Uber. There is Lyft. If you're out with someone who doesn't look like they can't handle themselves behind the wheel, get involved. Do not be a bystander. Take their keys away. Do something. We can't drive drunk. You can't drive drunk. You just can't. It's enough already.
Your point about Uber and Lyft in particular, I mean, even when I was a younger person and did not always, I never drove drunk, thank God, but like it did not always make the best choices in life as a teenager. But I mean, it is so easy to not put yourself in these situations these days. Certainly much easier than it was when I was young. And the consequences are like they're horrifying, even for the perpetrators. I'm sure this young person, and obviously my sympathies go to the family first, but I'm sure this young person never wanted to be responsible for this kind of a horror show. So,
and with that, off to issue 2. In the back pages of Ontario's 2025 budget the other day were details on legislative changes coming to automated speed enforcement and red light cameras. This coming on the heels of the capital city announcing that it will be doubling the number of these cameras in the city from 75 to 150. Let's hear what the Premier had to say about the proposed changes. Doug Ford.
The city's using it as their revenue source, and it's a little unfair. They hide them all over the place, and if you're going 10 kilometers an hour over, you're getting dinged. So all we're saying is not to take them away. I don't like them, but let's put signs up. The whole purpose of a radar trap is to slow people down. So let's slow people down by putting big signs that there's a radar ahead, and we'll go from there. That bee's going to go in my mouth any second here.
Yes.
All right.
Oh, no, not again.
Almost. No.
That is, I mean, okay, serious story here, but on the other hand, the Premier can't seem to get away from the bees that want to fly into his mouth, and we well remember the time
don't know
he
what
swallowed
he did in
one.
a past life to make those bees so angry.
The bees don't like him. Anyway, legislative changes potentially that he's talking about include what?
So this was something that was actually in the Tory election platform, such as it was earlier this year. And I got to say, it was one of those things that I flagged when I saw it, and I was kind of bracing for something a bit more radical, if I could put it that way, because we just heard what the Premier said, and we know that, the Premier has a substantial record on basically wanting to make lives easier for drivers. So I thought they were going to basically take the hammer to municipalities much more forcefully than they have. What we are seeing instead is that payments for these systems can't be based on the number of tickets generated by cameras. So just to make that clear, municipalities are, at least in some cases, are not owning and operating these cameras themselves. They are partnering with private companies who are owning and operating them. And I guess the government's concern is that in some cases, the third-party vendors are being rewarded for the number of tickets that they issue or the amount of money that those cameras take in.
So that's why it dings you when you go 41 and a 40.
Yes, and so
the
government wants to put a stop to that. They I guess they're fine if the contract just has a flat fee or a flat payment to the vendor, but they don't want to see the vendor incentivized to maximize revenue. They are giving the transportation minister the power to direct municipalities to change how their systems operate. They want to, as you heard the Premier allude to, they want to require municipalities to publish camera locations and display signs. My understanding, certainly I remember seeing press releases from the City of Toronto, very loudly saying, like, this is where the speed cameras are going to go. It has not stopped people from speeding in those areas with those speed cameras. Mm-hmm. Maybe big signage will help. I don't know. And the other thing that the province is talking about is changing the regulations around how municipalities designate community safety zones. These are the areas that allow the municipality to double speeding fines in some cases. And this is going to be one, particularly in Toronto, where I'm sort of most familiar with the geography of it, that I will be keeping an eye on, because just the nature of how Toronto is built out is that there are a lot of school zones and community safety zones that are also near to, I think, what a lot of drivers would consider to be, high-speed arterial roads. And where those places overlap is where I've seen a lot of drivers get very frustrated because the road is built the way it is. It is natural for drivers to go a certain speed in these areas, but the posted speed limit might not reflect the built reality, if I could put it that way. And so there are places where drivers are getting dinged. And then there are other places where, like in High Park here in Toronto, where one camera has been raking in huge amounts of money. I want to say, I'm actually not sympathetic to the idea that this is just a cash grab. This is actually just a part of the city where drivers have gotten very used to driving very, very fast. And it's High Park. Like, this is a part of the city that people also walk and ride their bikes on, and there have been, in fact, a lot of injuries, and I think at least 1 or 2 deaths in recent years where cyclists have been hit, for example. So,
well, I guess we got to figure out, are these primarily supposed to be devices designed to get people to slow down, or are these, as the Premier suggests and doesn't like, primarily to raise money for municipalities because they don't like raising property taxes?
Well, so, we're talking about the City of Toronto here because this is where I'm sort of most familiar with some of the numbers. The cameras that the City of Toronto has used, and as we're saying, they are proposing to double. They generated about $40 million in fines in last year. That said, they also happen to be targeted by vandals quite a bit. They get cut down, they get knocked over. There's actually one in my neighborhood, and at the intersection that, like, my kid and I, like, when I walk them to school, like, it's kind of, a no man's land. And I was really grateful for that speeding camera because it did slow people down. And then somebody just knocked it over and, like, put it the front down on the ground. And I did mention the camera on Parkside Drive that has been cut down 3 times, and the city has to keep putting it back up.
That's the one near High Park?
Yeah, it's the one that issued 65,000 tickets, presumably, at least hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue from that one camera alone. But again, this is like a part of the city where everybody acknowledges that, like, at least on that slice of road, it's actually, like, dangerously fast. Municipalities, of course, have a different perspective on these cameras. They have shown that speeding does in fact drop where these cameras are installed. They are doing the job that we are asking to. Like it or not, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways that we can enforce speeding regulations, but fines is the way that the province has decided, right? It's like municipalities are just using the tools that the province has made available to them. In theory, we give drivers jail time for speeding infractions, but we've decided not to do that, right? So these cameras are doing a job, and like, I realize that, like, the Premier talks about, you're getting a ticket for just being, like, 10 kilometers over the speeding limit, but we are talking about cameras catching people who are breaking the law. And I really, again, I know I'm not the car owner.
You're talking like a cyclist. There's no doubt about it.
I'm the Marxist cyclist here. But, at least in some of these cases, right, like, it's not people getting dinged for going 10 over the speed limit, right? Some of these cameras are regularly catching stretches of the city where people are doing 30, 40, 50 over the speed limit. Okay, if we bend the rules so that people can go 10 over, like, yes, I'm, a bleeding heart cyclist. I'm not going to cry too much over that. So long as we still have the ability to catch, the much more dangerous behavior.
The one part of the Premier's line that I do like is that there should at least be signs up. If these are not just going to be cash grabs, put a sign up saying there's a speed camera coming up ahead. If you go over 40, we're going to nail you. And, I noticed we're not too far here from Avenue Road where the big hill is as you come up Avenue Road. People are driving more slowly now. Yeah. And the reality is, I assume that means there are many fewer traffic accidents and fewer fatalities on the roads, which at the end of the day, that's what we want.
Yeah. Can I make a COVID point here?
Why not?
I mean, one of the things that I think we are still dealing with is that, during COVID, a whole bunch of people stopped driving. The roads were suddenly a lot emptier, and huge numbers of people started speeding, like way, way more. And this is like a pattern we've seen, certainly in the GTA, but all over North America. And frankly, like, a lot of people seem to adopt much more dangerous driving habits coming out of COVID. And I think some of what we are dealing with today on the roads is still like a very long, if I can say, long COVID effect of that. I would love to see some more research into that, but that is just my sort of personal anecdotal belief.
Add it to the list of COVID hangovers.
Yes.
I'm sure there are others. And with that, off to issue 3. Let's just take you behind the scenes a little bit for this program. Every week, JMM and I and our producer Matthew O'Mara, we start an email chain and we start pitching ideas for consideration here on Poly. And we were agreed on the first two items today, and then JMM emailed saying he wanted to talk about the government's planning bill. It was so unlike him to want to talk about the province's planning bill. JMM, I thought for sure you'd want to do a full segment on the Leafs and how they need to rebuild and what's required going forward. So I don't know. If you insist, I guess we can talk about the planning bill, but I don't know. What?
I did leave open the option that something much more interesting and novel would come up. But I went to bat for this planning bill because I think it's important to not let it get entirely sidelined. The government introduced Bill 17 right before the budget, so we were not able to give it a lot of attention last week. The Protect Ontario by Building Faster and Smarter Act, we're going to see a lot of these government bills. I suspect every single government bill, at least for the spring session, has Protect Ontario in it some way.
Yes.
It makes about 24 changes to different Ontario laws and other regulations, all with the goal of getting more homes built.
Would you favor us with a brief tutorial on what perchance those changes might include?
I thought you would never ask. So there are two big highlights that I want to put a spotlight on for our audience. They are changes to inclusionary zoning rules and the Ontario Building Code and what rules Ontario municipalities can make. These are going to be very, very big changes in the City of Toronto itself, but they will also affect other municipalities as well. Basically, the government is restricting what people or what municipalities can do with inclusionary zoning, and I'll explain that a bit more in a minute. But the big one that they are doing is saying municipalities cannot impose building requirements above and beyond what is set out in the Ontario Building Code. In Canada, there's like a national building code, which basically only binds like the federal government when it does things, so like I guess military bases. And then the vast majority of construction is regulated by provincial building codes, so the Ontario Building Code here in this province. But Toronto City Council and some other cities had adopted green building standards, basically saying that when somebody wants to build a new condo, we want to see more insulation, better windows, these kinds of things to make more environmentally friendly buildings. Developers had challenged Toronto's building standard on the grounds that Toronto has no legislative power, no authority to impose a higher requirement than what is required in the building code. That case was before the court, but with this new legislation, I suspect that court case is moot. Like the court might actually just decide not to hear it any further because this legislation basically answers the question. It says like, no, cities cannot impose these requirements. Then there's inclusionary zoning. This is where a city requires a developer to provide affordable housing as a condition of getting its building approval. So it's usually either like a share of the units that are being built or a share of the square footage that is being added. And then, of course, the city doesn't just want to doesn't want the developer to sell these units cheaply and then they just enter the market and become unaffordable again. So there's also usually some kind of time guarantee that the city asks for. The City of Toronto had a policy on the books that said that up to 22% of the new floor area should be affordable for 99 years. That's a pretty aggressive inclusionary zoning policy by any standard I know of. Bill 17 will now cut that to no more than 5% and for no longer than 25 years. So in theory, that's a really big cut, right? And you could understand why affordable housing advocates in Toronto would be pretty upset by that. The catch here is that Toronto's inclusionary zoning policy was still waiting on provincial action to actually be implemented. So it was sitting there on the books, but it had not actually come into force in a real way. There were some exceptions for developments where the city was an actual partner, but otherwise the policy was not in place. So for better or worse, there were no private projects in the pipeline that would have otherwise been required to adhere to that inclusionary zoning policy.
Just give me a hint as to what you think the province's thinking is on this. Is the idea here we want to put as few restrictions on developers as possible in the hopes that will encourage them to build more, thus increase supply, thus bring prices down?
Yeah, that seems to be it. whatever you think of inclusionary zoning policy, and there is a very active debate about what the right level for an inclusionary zoning policy is, it is a form of a tax on new housing. In the same way that we've talked a lot about development charges on this podcast, those are also a kind of a tax on new housing. And the government's concern was that particularly with the weak housing market in Ontario at the moment, that inclusionary zoning policies being set too high at the municipal level could depress more homes from being built. So that's the problem that they are trying to address.
Anything else here tickled your fancy?
Yes. One thing that I just, it's one of those things that you sort of almost don't believe it has to be said in the year 2025, but the province is going to legalize public schools.
Well, what do you mean? I thought they were legal already.
Well, yeah. So in many municipalities, a residentially zoned area prohibits a school board from building a public school in that residential area. The school board has to go and apply to the city to get the land rezoned for a public school. I don't believe that was actually the case in the city of Toronto, but there are other municipalities where I think that was a problem. And so, yes, in the year of our Lord 2025, we're going to legalize public schools and childcare spaces in those schools. So, I mean, that's nice.
What a concept. Anything else?
So there is a bunch of interesting stuff
Oh
about...
my gosh, I knew there was more.
Yeah,
Okay.
We're not even close to done yet. There's a bunch of interesting stuff about water and sewer items that they might end up being important. The government has talked a lot about water and sewer policy over the last few years because homes need to be connected to water lines and sewer lines. But by the same token, they've been talking about this stuff for years now, and it may just end up being the case that what actually matters is I think at this point, more than $2 billion that they are committing to grants to get get the actual sewers and water pipes built. A whole bunch of interesting creative stuff they're trying to do. It might just end up being the actually effective tool here is writing a big check.
Anything else, John Michael?
No, I think we're good, actually.
Saints be praised. Now, can I ask the obvious question?
Yes.
Are any of these changes actually going to get more homes built faster?
I mean, some of them might, but I found it kind of an underwhelming bill. I mean, I have been banging the table for years about the housing crisis and about the need for really aggressive planning reforms. And this was a compromise bill, and you can see that in a lot of the ways that the bill is structured. Just to take the issue of development charges, for example, right? The federal government would like to see development charges, particularly in Ontario and BC, wants to see them cut in half. This bill does not do that. The minister was at great pains to say that the government is not forcing municipalities to cut development charges. It certainly likes when they do of their own free will. The minister has praised Vaughan's mayor, Stephen Del Duca, and Mississauga's mayor because they have cut development charges, as have other municipalities in the GTA, but they're not going to force them to. Compromise is a virtue in politics, but when you have a compromise between what developers want and what municipalities want, I don't think you necessarily arrive at the goal of actually lowering the cost of new housing, or at least not necessarily. So keep an open mind. Obviously, I hope this bill succeeds. As I say, I was kind of underwhelmed.
Now, have you got this planning stuff out of your system now, or are we going to be back at this again next week for another 10 minutes?
Well, I'm not going to go another 10 minutes, but there is one other item that I wanted to mention here. Because
of course there is.
It is not a Bill 17 item, but it is a planning item, and it just happened this week. And this is about Bill 5. This is the bill we've talked about before. It gives the government the power to create special economic zones in Ontario. That has raised concerns both from Indigenous groups in the north who are worried about how this might be used to open new mines, but also it has alarmed labor groups who worry that legislated labor rights might be annulled. Jessica Smith-Cross talked about that in the episode last week. The other thing, or one of the other things that Bill 5 does is fast-track the approval for a landfill in Dresden, Ontario. Or rather, I should say it fast-tracks a major expansion of an existing landfill in Dresden.
And that could be potentially problematic because there are obviously lots of local residents who don't want that. And holy smokes, we saw something this past week, I think on social media. I saw Steve Pinsonneau, who was the MPP for Chatham-Kent-Leamington, took over from Monty McNaughton, who used to have that seat, and he did a Facebook post in which he essentially came out against came out against his own government, the progressive conservative government, saying people are angry, and quite frankly, so am I.
Yeah, I mean, the politics of landfills have actually been really interesting for this government, kind of funny. They came into office promising to give municipalities functionally a bit of a veto on new landfills or the expansion of landfills in Ontario. For a very, very long time in Ontario, the legislation recognized that we need landfills, but nobody wants them around them. And so this was just not a matter that we were going to give municipalities a vote on. And then, and like that went through all of the Liberal years and the Tory years behind it. It was just, that was a settled issue. The Ford government came in, they changed the law to give municipalities a bit more of a say on it. They had promised that this Dresden landfill would go through a full environmental approval process. And now Bill 5 says, actually, we're just going to say it does not need an environmental approval at all. And you can see they're really struggling with this issue about, nobody wants, it's not like sexy, but like landfills are critical infrastructure in that sense. And they are really struggling about how to place this. There is also we've mentioned Jessica Smith-Cross a few times. She of course is the editor-in-chief for the Trillium. The Trillium has also reported on some matters about who was giving donations to the PC party and how closely associated they are with this particular landfill proposal. So I will urge our viewers and listeners to go check out the Trillium's reporting on that as well.
What did Deep Throat always say to Bob Woodward?
Follow the money.
Follow the money. That's exactly right. And with that, we're off to your column, my column. Okay, time now for our regular feature, Your Column, My Column, in which JMM and I talk about the columns we wrote for our website, tvo.org, over the past week. What do you got up today?
We normally don't talk a great deal about federal politics. We are focused on Ontario politics, but the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, unveiled his new cabinet last week. One of the notable MPs not in cabinet was Nate Erskine-Smith, who had just relatively recently taken the post of housing minister, had gotten a lot of kudos in his role as housing minister, is no longer the housing minister. Why does this matter? Well, because he is very clearly considering his options about what his political future holds. And
he wasn't even going to run again, right?
He wasn't even going to run again. He was talked into running again, in part because I guess he believed that he would continue to have some role in cabinet. He said on social media that I'm trying to remember, his wording was something like it's difficult not to feel at least a little bit disrespected. That was in a broader post about wishing the new cabinet well and congratulating his colleagues. But obviously, journalists being who we are, we focused on that line. Separately from federal drama, Ontario Liberal leader Bonnie Crombie will face a leadership review later this year because, of course, she did not lead the party to form government after the most recent election. And I think a lot of Liberals would acknowledge that, those were disappointing results, right? Came in third in the seat count. Crombie did not win her own seat. A lot of questions being asked about whether she will be staying on. The caucus has backed her. The Executive Council of the Liberal Party has backed her, but it has not silenced these questions. And, of course, the person who came second in the last leadership race was Nate Erskine-Smith, who now finds himself something of a free agent, if I can't badly abuse a sports term.
She has said, for the record, that she intends to stay on, that she is staying on to rebrand the party, refresh the party, and get them back into a position to be more competitive next time.
Yes, and so I would say, at the moment, and this is a line that I use in the column, I think there are three camps at the moment within the Liberal Party of Ontario. There are people who think Crombie should stay. There are people who think that Crombie should go. And then there are people who think that Crombie should go, but really want to see a process that does not see Nate Erskine-Smith become the next leader. Nate Erskine-Smith, I wouldn't say he's necessarily like a profoundly polarizing figure, but he has his detractors. Of course he is. It's politics, right? And so that third group is going to be, frankly, the one that decides Bonnie Crombie's fate. Right. Whether they want to see her stay or go will be something that we also have to pay attention to later this year. And how about you, Steve?
Well, this is a week for political anniversaries. It was 60 years ago this past Wednesday. 60 years ago, the date was May 21st, 1965. that a 35-year-old minister of education in the John Robarts government got up in the legislature and introduced a bill that would create a whole new system of education in the province of Ontario. I'm going to give you a guess as to who that minister of education 60 years ago was.
Are we sitting in a room named after him?
Maybe.
Is he on your shirt right now?
Maybe. Yes, indeed. His name was Bill Davis, and he was Robarts' education minister and the guy who introduced the bill. Minister of Education, incidentally, in the 1960s for almost 9 years. The new college system, not community colleges, incidentally. They've always been called community colleges for some reason. That's actually not what they're called. In the bill itself, they're called Colleges of Applied Arts and Technology. And the very first one was Centennial College. Not surprisingly, it was built in 1967, which was our centennial year. 500 students back then, offering 16 different programs. How many students do you think Centennial has today? 500 back then. How many today?
I would assume certainly 5,000 or more.
45,000. 45,000. And if you go across the, it doesn't matter if you're talking George Brown, Humber, a lot of these enormous colleges have gone from a few hundred students to tens of thousands of students now. There are 24 colleges all across the province. They are educating hundreds of thousands of students every year. It is a system, quite frankly, that has been the envy of the world. However, and this is what the column is about, there's been a tuition freeze for 7 years. Great for students, not so great for the institutions, which in a world of inflation means you're falling constantly behind. Therefore, they are closing campuses, they are laying off staff, they are canceling programs. Add to that the cutback in foreign student visas from the federal level of government. And of course, these students paid twice, thrice, even quadruple what domestic students paid. They were in effect subsidizing the whole system. And we've got a situation right now where the college system is feeling some major, major stressors. You and I were in the budget lockup last week. If you look at the budget and you see how much money is being allocated to colleges and universities over the next 3 years, the number drops. I think it's $1.4, $1.6 billion, something like that. Anyway, so there's a big cut coming. Happy 60th anniversary indeed to the college system. Anyway, this is a really problematic file. There have been 4 colleges and universities ministers in the Ford government over the last 7 years, suggesting that this is not necessarily a high-profile portfolio for this premier or this government. And a lot of questions, thus the column this week.
Yeah, I will add, because I got some feedback from somebody in the government about that number specifically, because I wrote about it last week in our budget coverage. They would be happy for me to mention that the decline in funding for the post-secondary education is basically the expiry of that $1.3 billion or so that they
The one-time
announced.
pop-up, yes.
Yes, it was a one-time funding that is expiring. They would want me to say that the base level of funding is not shrinking that much, which is mathematically true. The sector is lighting its hair on fire because the $1.3 billion was not enough in the first place. They were really hoping to see that be made permanent, and that is not the government policy right now.
Well, if the ministry wants you to make that abundantly clear, and thank you for doing so, I guess I should make abundantly clear that the government put together a blue ribbon panel which reported last year that the amount of money required to go into the colleges system in order to keep the lights on was twice what the government actually allocated.
Yeah.
Right? They put in $1.2 billion, I think, and it really needed to be, according to the government's own blue ribbon panel recommendations, needed to be twice that much. So this is a system that is starting to feel it.
And I would just add very quickly that, we have already seen classes canceled or layoffs in some cases, and we're going to continue to see those because we're also seeing enrollments fall for the coming academic year starting in September. Algoma University has announced a 50% decline in enrollment, if you can believe. I imagine we are going to see similar numbers in lots of other schools. So this is we can use the language of a crisis, an emergency, whatever you want to call it, but for the sector, it's not great, and it is not over, and it is going to continue well into this year and next year.
Okay, let's go to the mailbag, shall we? If you've got a burning question or an insightful comment, we always love hearing from you at onpolitics@tvo.org. JMM, take it away.
Right. This is an email from Tyler in Whitby who writes, Hey, Steve and JMN. I was listening to the most recent podcast talking about the budget and was interested to hear about the permanent cut to the gas tax and its effect, or apparent lack thereof, on public transit users. You might be interested to know that a lot of regional governments rely on federal and provincial subsidy to fund their regional transit systems. Among the highest amount provided in these subsidies comes from the gas tax. My local region of Durham received over $9 million last year from the gas tax to go towards their transit budget. So this cut to the gas tax and loss in revenue may in fact have a negative impact on transit riders rather than no impact at all, as said in last week's episode. That's Tyler from Whitby. P.S. Thanks for such a great podcast. I always listen when I'm commuting to work on the bus.
Okay, a public transit user. Look, at this email really highlights one of the great conundrums that any government has to face.
Yes.
We had a couple of emails after our budget show about the cut to the gas tax and taking the tolls off the provincially owned portion of Highway 407. And as we mentioned last week, the permanent gas tax cut will save drivers, I guess, about $115 a year. Was that right?
Something like that, yes.
Okay. It will also deprive the provincial treasury of about $1.2 billion a year.
Adds up.
Indeed. And we can see here from Tyler's letter that it has multiple impacts down the line. So maybe you should take us through some of that.
Right. And so, municipalities don't collect the gas tax themselves. It is given to them by the provincial and federal governments. And actually, you and I have done some episodes from AMO's annual conference before. In Ontario, it's actually AMO that helps disperse these funds to various municipalities. In this case, I actually don't think that there's a huge concern here, because remember that this permanent cut to the gas tax has followed several years of a temporary cut to the gas tax, right? The government had announced years ago that they were going to stop collecting this tax for a little bit, and they kept extending it, and now it's being made permanent. For all those years, the gas tax share that went to municipalities has not decreased. The province is still collecting some gas tax, and they have basically said that the amount that they are cutting is the amount that would have gone directly into the provincial treasury. The amount that is staying on includes the share that is going to municipalities. So just to make this concrete, the amount of money that was dispersed to municipalities last year was almost exactly the same amount of money that had gone out in prior years. Now, that isn't to say that the government could not choose to cut the gas tax or cut municipal share of the gas tax. Of course, they could. At the moment, that does not seem to be what they are doing, and they have gone out of their way. I couldn't find it in the most recent budget or in this year's releases, but I certainly recall in previous years they have said, cutting the provincial gas tax in this way will not affect the municipal share that we disperse. That said, the announcement for gas tax funding is usually made at that AMO conference late in the summer in August. So if there's any changes, we will be sure to let our listeners know in August, because I imagine we'll probably come back for an August episode.
I suspect we shall do so. I suspect. You want to give the email address and let's get out of here?
Yes. Once again, that is onpolitics@tvo.org if you would like to ask about any content on the show.
Excellent. And that is the On Poly podcast for this Friday, May 23rd, 2025.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Any feedback you have, we're always happy to hear it, good, bad, or indifferent. Write us an email at onpolitics@tvo.org. Please include your first and last name and where you're located.
This week's episode was produced and edited by Matthew O'Mara, video editing by Colin Kish.
Production support from Jonathan Hallowell and TVO's Digital Media Services team.
Our managing editor is Katie O'Connor. Lori Few is the executive producer of Digital. John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
Special thanks to the studio crew here at 2180 Yonge Street for making the video portion of this podcast happen. And until next Friday, everybody, bye-bye.
Bye.